Hey BookTube! Welcome to the autism awareness video I've hinted at doing in the last few videos. Today I'm just going to talk about a stack of books I've been reading this month and the last couple previous months that feature, they're either memoirs that feature autism authors or they're fictional books that feature autistic characters. I started working on this video a couple months back, but I figured I would post it now because April is Autism Awareness Month. April 2nd was actually Autism Awareness Day, and I myself have a severely autistic cousin. So I like reading about autism and Asperger's and these conditions, so not only can I maybe one day try to understand what's going on with my cousin a little bit better, but I've also had friends who have had children who are diagnosed with either autism or Asperger's, and so it's just something that I think, even if you don't have it present in your family, I think it's good to be educated about it so that if you are conversing with somebody who has autism or Asperger's, you don't make an ass out of yourself thinking that they're mentally ill or stupid or something. It's just good to be aware of some of the flag characteristics of these conditions and just be informed. Just, approach them with the same kindness and openness you would approach anybody. And I think it's even more important now after reading. One of the books I read was Look Me in the Eye by John Elder Robison. And in his book, he talks about the fact that in 2007, the CDC did a study trying to figure out the spread of autism, and I believe he said in the study it was just in America alone they discovered that 1 in 150 people, which translates to 1 in 50 families, I think, somebody will fall somewhere on the autism spectrum. 1 in 150 people. That's a really narrow window when you consider how many millions of people live in just the US. So yeah, I think we all need to be aware of this and educated here. So I'm just trying to debate where to start. I guess I'll go into the fictional work and then talk about the memoirs after that. So one of the first books I read was Rules by Cynthia Lord. This is a middle grade book. This is the story about Catherine, who's 12. And she has an older brother. I think he's just like a year or two older, and he has autism. In Catherine's family, for some reason, her parents have sort of left the task of controlling her brother when they go out social. They've left that on Catherine's shoulders, which when I was reading this, I was thinking that's a lot to ask of a 12-year-old to take on an autistic sibling by themselves and say, you're in charge of wrangling him in if he gets, socially awkward. But she takes it on, and she's incredibly mature for a 12-year-old in this book. But not unbelievably so, just impressively so. Her brother's name is David. Catherine comes up with this way to gently teach David how to interact with people in society without upsetting him or embarrassing him. She makes this notebook where she makes this list of rules to remember when talking to other people. And she puts it in a way that helps him really understand how to communicate with other people. And in turn, it also helps them communicate with him. She also goes along with David whenever he goes to his speech therapist. Every time she goes with David to his speech therapist appointments, there's another boy around David's age that sits in the lobby waiting for his appointment to come up. He's paralyzed. I forget what's going on with Jason, the boy Catherine meets, other than he's in a wheelchair, but he talks through picture cards. He puts picture cards together to make conversation. I forget what his condition is that makes him do that. I was trying to remember, but all the time she's waiting for David during his appointment, she sits with Jason and starts talking with him. She creates extra cards for him so they can have more expanded conversations, because his mom just sort of made these cards for him to just sort of basically get by in conversation. But Catherine is like the first person, other than Jason's mom, to actually treat him like a person, actually try to have conversation with him and not look at him like he's a freak, and actually try to be his friend. For being such a little book, such a little story, this was one of those ones that had so much heart in it that I just loved. If you have a middle grade child that's autistic, this would be a good book for them, or maybe siblings, to help make them feel less awkward, or if they're struggling with the way the home situation is, this book could really help, I think. And the rules that Catherine writes for David, I think some of them are just good reminders for people in general, autism or not. She tells him to remember that looking closer can make something beautiful. You know, just don't immediately write somebody off just for the way they immediately look to you. Try to see the beauty in them. And then the one that sort of broke my heart a little bit is she writes in his rule book, sometimes people will laugh at you when they like you, but sometimes they will laugh to hurt you. And that just struck a nerve with me because I have so many memories behind that one. But yeah, it's a really touching story. It actually won the 2007 Newbery Honor Award, and it says on here it also won the Schneider Family Book Award, so definitely check that one out. These aren't ones that I've read recently, but I thought if you haven't checked them out and you're interested in this topic, definitely put these on your TBR because they're both amazing. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. A boy with Asperger's, I believe. I think it's Asperger's. He finds a murdered dog in his yard. I believe the dog has like a pitchfork through its chest. Christopher, the boy, takes it upon himself to figure out who murdered this neighborhood dog, and in the process he starts finding out things about his neighborhood and his own family, and he goes on this big adventure. I loved the way that Christopher's brain worked in this, and it was just a really fast, interesting read. I would definitely recommend checking that one out. This one, I don't think it's ever said in the book, but I always throw this one in when talking about it. Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close by Jonathan Safran Foer. I always mention this one because I remember reading it, and the boy in this book, Oscar, he just struck me as having that same sort of way of thinking as someone with Asperger's. He just seemed to have that same way of processing information. There was something about it that struck me as being in that same vein, but I don't think it's actually expressed in the story. It's been a while since I've read this. Even if you're not interested in autism, just go ahead and read this book because it's amazing. One other one I read recently that, again, I don't think it's expressly said in the book, but it's another one where I got the feeling that the main character had that same sort of processing, was The Pleasure of My Company by Steve Martin. The reason I say this one is because Daniel in this book, he's not overly expressive. He doesn't pick up on a lot of social cues and conversational cues that we would immediately read. I've read in a number of autism memoirs that's one of the flag things, not being able to pick up on facial expressions, social cues, that kind of thing, body language. And that's something that Daniel, it's not that he's cold, it's just, I think it's because the way the autistic mind works, it's so literal, I think, I don't know if that's the right word, but it's so literal that it doesn't pick up on little hints the same way that general society gets used to expressing themselves with. That, and the fact that Daniel is like a mathematical genius in this book, and he talks about doing these mathematical squares. I forget what they're called. Equation squares for relaxation and for funsies. Just the way his mind works struck me as very similar to some of the books I've read that feature Asperger characters. The other fiction book I have, I almost forgot to mention. While I was in the process of doing the reading for this video, I was contacted by an author through Amazon who mentioned that they had a book they would like me to review. And the book featured an autistic character, so I thought I would mention it here. It's called The Asperger's Adventure, and I will put a cover image here. The Asperger's Adventure is written by Kyle Robertson. This is just a little novella. I think it's only like 95 pages. It has to do with a story about a scientist who has Asperger's. It's a science fiction book, and in the story, the scientist is trying to come up with a way to make a pill or a serum that will completely cure his Asperger's, and in turn other people's. In the first round of experiments, he comes up with a serum that not only cures Asperger's, it cures everything. It magically cures cancer, AIDS, STDs, digestive diseases, issues, and just like anything you can think of, it'll fix in the body. But the problem is, it turns out that as a side effect, people lose their cognitive awareness, and so they just you get rid of the diseases, but they basically become vegetables. And so yeah, that's not gonna work. That's gonna be a tough sell. So he goes back in the lab after a number of years, figures out what the glitch was, and does perfect the serum. And then of course, you know, when you have when word gets out that you have a cure for everything, then yeah, there's going to be people that want that want to get rich off of it, and they're going to come after you. And that's what happens to the scientist, and he goes on this sort of across the world kind of adventure, but really running for his life. It's an interesting story. I liked the concept behind it, but the book itself, it had some pretty major editing issues for me. It needed an editor really, really bad. But the author was kind enough to send me a copy of it and ask me to take a look at it, so I thought I would mention it here. If the story sounds like something that's of interest to you, I will link it below. Yeah, just be aware of the editing issues when you go into it. And then the only other novel I have for this one is Shine, Shine, Shine by Lydia Netzer. So this is the story of Sunny and Maxon. Sunny and Maxon have known each other since they were children, and in the beginning of the story now they're married. Sunny is, I think she's a stay-at-home mom. Maxon is an astronaut with NASA. Maxon has to go up, and he gets assigned to this mission to go up in space, and he's created these robots with a very advanced program in AI, or artificial intelligence. NASA decides that they want to use his robots to experiment with colonization on the moon. They're going to put the robots up there. And so he has to go on this mission to go colonize the moon with his robots. He's up there for a while, back down on Earth. She is raising their autistic son, Robert, who they nickname Bubber. And she's also pregnant with their second child. So you can imagine the stress on this woman. Has a man thousands of miles up in the air above the planet, hoping he comes back down safely. Doesn't know how long he's going to be out because he's just the risk of the job. She's also got stress with, while he's away, trying to raise their autistic son by herself. She's also got a mother. I don't remember what happened to the mother, but the mother is in a coma on life support, and the doctors are kind of on Sunny's case about whether or not to shut the machines off. Understandably, that's one of those decisions that most people don't like to take on too quickly, because, you know, that's just a lot of pressure being the one to decide that. So she's got a lot of strain, and then it's sort of all exacerbated by this one day when, I remember if she was I think she was taking her son to daycare or something like that. She ends up getting T-boned by another car. Her son is okay, but Sunny, in the impact of the accident, has her wig ripped off. It's revealed to everyone that Sunny has been hiding the fact that she has been battling alopecia, the most severe kind, where you lose all body hair everywhere. I have some issues with this book, or a lot of issues with this book. I was really excited to get into it because I liked all the elements it said it had, as far as the astronaut husband and the autistic son. I don't know, I thought it was going to be a story about this relationship that is so strong it survives anything, and there was going to be this really heartwarming love story between the couple. I thought Sunny was going to be written like seeing the beauty in day-to-day life, given what her strains were, and it didn't work out that way for me. It was just a lot of Sunny bitching about everything and being miserable, and she was just depressed all the time. And I mean, I understand the strain she was under, but this woman was just fixating on every single bad thing in her life and blowing it up so that it seemed even more evil than it was. I don't know, the story goes back and forth between what Sunny is thinking, because there's not a whole lot of, other than the car accident, there's not a whole lot of action in the story. It's mainly what's going on in Sunny's mind versus what's going on in Maxon's mind up in space. And the chapters go back and forth between their inner dialogues. And that's essentially the book. Maxon, his inner dialogue, he keeps saying that he loves Sunny, but there was just, I don't know, it's just, I didn't feel it. Like I put in my written review, when I was reading it, it felt like when you have that friend that you know is in kind of a lousy relationship and they keep telling you, oh, but I love them. No, they've got some things they need to work through, but I love them. And you feel like they're selling it to themselves more than anyone else. That's what it felt like hearing Maxon's inner dialogue. On Sunny's side, she talks about the fact that they had this big blow-up fight like the night before he's supposed to go up into space, and she says some horrid things to him right before he's getting in a rocket, which I'm just like, you couldn't have maybe held your tongue and just maybe written it down in a letter and burned it or something. I don't know, just gotten that out some way else, because now he's got to go up into space with that in his inner ear the whole time. He goes up there and he's thinking about it. She's down on Earth thinking about what she said. And at some point in the mission, NASA loses contact with Maxon's shuttle. And so then NASA has to call Sunny and say, yeah, we don't know what's going on with your husband right now. And so then her tune goes back and forth between, oh my God, I'm such a horrible person, and all the things that she thinks Maxon has done wrong to lead her to think the things she does about him. I don't know, I don't really enjoy those kind of stories where the main character is just miserable from page 1 to end and nothing is really happening action-wise and you don't see the character growing. I don't like books that are just an entire book of bitching without any action to try to make things better. And I felt like that's what this was. Side stories that I just felt weren't, not that they weren't relevant, but just they were unnecessary. Felt like there was a lot in here that didn't really add anything. It was extra wording. And so I ended up I was just bored and annoyed with this by the end. And I didn't really get a feel for Sunny as far as the autism aspect. And she talks about like all the doctors just wanting to medicate her son, and she does talk about some of the communication challenges she has with him, but it doesn't seem to play that big a role in the story. So I didn't feel like I got to know the son, Robert, that well, or Sunny's challenges, or, you know, the joys that can also happen with having an autistic child. She just seemed to fixate on woe is me, why do I always get the shaft kind of attitude, and yeah, I don't know that I would recommend this one. So that was the fiction I read. That just leaves the memoirs. So the first memoir I read was Born on a Blue Day, Inside the Extraordinary Mind of an Autistic Savant by Daniel Tammet. I think this was the first book he wrote. He's actually written a couple since this one came out. This one I thought gave me a really good, one of the first really strong glimpses I've had into an autistic mind. Other than, I think it was a couple years ago I read this book, Animals in Translation by Temple Grandin. This one was really good. This might have been the first autistic memoir I ever picked up. But this one is not solely about her autism. This one talks about the similarities in the way that our autistic mind works compared to the way animals' brains work, which it was just fascinating, the connections she made. So that was the first one, but I only got like little glimpses as far as the autism went, trying to understand it. And I still had some questions after reading that, and there was a lot that I wasn't quite sure of, that this one helped explain a little bit better. And this is a very short read, but I just found this one really fascinating. Daniel Tammet he's an autistic savant with a specialization in mathematics. He has Asperger's, and he explains that there are actually different types of savants. You don't necessarily have to be a mathematics savant. You can be a savant in literature or technology and that kind of thing. It just depends on what your brain is open to. His was in mathematics. He talks about actually seeing numbers. Whenever he sees numbers, his brain associates it with colors. Synesthesia. He talks about a lot of other challenges in his life that he's had to work through besides finding an understanding outside the Asperger's community. He had pretty severe epilepsy as a child that gradually worked itself out when he got into adulthood. He talks about the synesthesia. He also talks about the challenge of being a gay Christian. To explain the synesthesia a little bit better as far as it works with his Asperger's, he says, scientists call my visual emotional experience of numbers synesthesia, a rare neurological mixing of the senses, which most commonly results in the ability to see alphabetical letters and or numbers in color. Mine is an unusual and complex type, through which I see numbers as shapes, colors, textures, and motions. The number 1, for example, is a brilliant and bright white, like someone shining a flashlight into my eyes. 5 is a clap of thunder or the sound of waves crashing against rock. 37 is lumpy like porridge, while 89 reminds me of falling snow. For as long as I can remember, I have experienced numbers in the visual, synthetic way that I do. Numbers are my first language, one I often think and feel in. Emotions can be hard for me to understand or know how to react to, so I often use numbers to help me. If a friend says they feel sad or depressed, I picture myself sitting in the dark hollowness of number 6 to help me experience that same sort of feeling and understand it. If I read in an article that a person felt intimidated by something, I imagine myself standing next to the number 9. Whenever someone describes visiting a beautiful place, I recall my numerical landscapes and how happy they make me feel inside. By doing this, numbers actually help me get closer to understanding other people. That kind of gives you an idea of how that works in his mind, which I just found really fascinating and could kind of understand when he explains it that way. And I thought it was interesting. He said around the time that his book was published, it turned out that his brother Stephen was actually diagnosed with the same form of high-functioning autism that he talks about in this book. He also goes on to say that the struggle with communication skills and social environments that a lot of children with Asperger's and autism tend to go through. He said he actually had a little bit of an advantage because he ends up being one of 7 or 9 children. His parents end up having like a slew of kids, and so he sort of had his own built-in community of people to teach him how to interact with non-autistic people, which I thought was pretty cool. But he explains that that's why he's able to write this kind of book that can be understandable to anyone, because he's had his family to initially teach him how to speak and interact with others, and then the older he got, the more experience he got, the better his social skills got, like anyone. Yeah, I would recommend trying this one because Daniel is just a really interesting person to read about. He can speak, well, at the time of this publication, he could speak 10 languages. Given how fast he's able to learn languages, it could be well more than that now. And he talks about how he also has a love of fairy tales and palindromes. He goes through periods of hypergraphia where you cannot stop writing. He talks about how the automatic writing is commonly connected with epilepsy, which he struggled with as a child and had history of in his family. He talks about his parents having to buy paper in giant reams and rolls to keep up with how much he was constantly writing. And so he goes through periods of that. Oh, speaking of epilepsy, there's actually a really interesting chapter in here he has where he just talks about famous epileptics. There's a lot of really intriguing information there, but he talks about the connections between epilepsy and creativity. He talks about the famous epileptics like Dostoevsky and Lewis Carroll and Vincent van Gogh, just to name a few, and how the epilepsy affected their brains may have contributed or helped with their art. Just one thing that's cool about autistic memoirs in general is they can be really inspiring to people that are going through any sort of challenge in their life, any sort of illness, or anything that makes you think that you can't pursue the things you're interested in. Every one of these memoirs I picked up, Animals in Translation, Look Me in the Eye, Born on a Blue Day, they all have stories of saying, yes, I had autism, but you know what? I went out and did what I wanted to do. I figured out a way to get into the field I want to work in. In Animals in Translation, Temple Grandin talks about going into animal sciences. She goes to school, I believe it's for animal science. I think that's the degree program she went into. She ends up doing this class project where she observes the way cows are moved and treated in slaughterhouses. She watches them and realizes that there's got to be a better way to the way they were doing things. A lot of the slaughterhouse owners were complaining that cows were too difficult and they were too stupid and clumsy. Animals were getting hurt, workers were getting hurt. And Temple Grandin, the way her mind works, she actually took it and she said, well, you have to get to know the cow. You have to know what it's like from their perspective. And she actually went in with the cows, observed their behavior, tried to mimic it, and in her brain was able to visualize a more organic flowing pen, a way to corral them so that it's not as traumatizing. She goes into it saying, okay, yes, they're a necessary evil. People have to eat. And I know vegetarians are probably going to see this and go, they don't have to eat meat. I'm not getting into that argument. I'm just saying, in the environment she was in, where she was at the time, she said, we need the cows for food, so the right thing to do is to figure out how to do this as humanely as possible. And shoving a bunch of them through a door all at once and freaking them out and spooking them, that's obviously not humane, because then that's where the torturous behavior from the workers comes in, because they get frustrated and they said, oh, we'll just kill them. Whatever, just slaughter him. And so she said, let's do this humanely if it has to be done. So she figured out a system that was much gentler for the livestock, and these houses got the work they needed to get done, but in a calm, efficient, humane as possible way. That expanded into other avenues of her finding a lot of work where her designs for things end up making a lot of aspects of taking care of animals much more humane. So that's what she did in this. Daniel Tammet in his book points out that he doesn't want to be the guy that has to live with his mom and go get a pity job somewhere, being the disabled one at like a charity shop or something like that. He doesn't want to go that route. He wants the same opportunities everybody else has available to them. He ends up getting a job as a ESL, English as a Second Language teacher, in Lithuania, because he's like, it'll give me a chance to travel. I can learn a new language. I can teach English to other people. This job ended up being a good fit for him, because when he went out to find a job just from like a job listing, he said he struggled with like the way job listings are worded, the jargon. He doesn't understand the jargon of job advertisements, or the sort of unspoken expectations and understandings that go into job interview. He just wants to go in and be himself. And a lot of people know that, yeah, that's good up to a point, but you can't totally be yourself where you're never gonna get a job. There's some things about yourself that you gotta leave at home when you're going to a job. Like, most people understand that there are things that you gotta curb and clean up and all that. And he mentions that his brain doesn't work that way. He doesn't get all the unspoken rules to all of that. So becoming an ESL teacher worked out nice, because they didn't get into all that. they just wanted him to teach English. He said when he went to Lithuania, he ends up teaching the class to adults, mostly women, I think. And they were just so grateful. He says they didn't care or even really notice what, if anything, was wrong with him. They didn't pick up on it. They were just so excited to learn English and have someone new in the community that they didn't judge him. Some of the things he said he took away from the Lithuania job once it had ended, he said, "My experiences abroad had undoubtedly changed me. For one thing, I had learned a great deal about myself. I could see more clearly than ever before how my differences affected my day-to-day life, especially my interaction with other people. I had eventually come to understand that friendship was a delicate, gradual process that mustn't be rushed or seized upon, but allowed and encouraged to take its course over time. I pictured it as a butterfly, simultaneously beautiful and fragile, that once afloat belonged to the air, and any attempt to grab at it would only destroy it. I recalled how in the past at school I had lost potential friendships because, lacking social instinct, I had tried too hard and made completely the wrong impression. Lithuania had also allowed me to step back from myself and come to terms with my differentness by illustrating the fact that it needn't be a bad thing. As a foreigner, I had been able to teach English to my Lithuanian students and tell them all about life in Britain. Oh, because I didn't mention Daniel Tammet is from England. Not being the same as everyone else has been a positive advantage to me and an opportunity to help others. I also now have a database of widely varied experiences that I could reference in all manners of future situations. It gave me a greater confidence in my ability to cope with whatever life might bring me. The future wasn't anything for me to be afraid of anymore. In my tiny new bedroom back at home, I felt freer than ever before." One of the other things I thought was really interesting in this is he talks about how the internet can actually be helpful to people with autism, because when you communicate with people online, like maybe not necessarily through video, but by email or chat or something, the things that non-autistic people get frustrated with, like the way that conversational tones are missing and words can get misinterpreted and we can get upset over the way somebody worded something, so that actually helps an autistic brain because they don't pick up on those social cues anyway. Their brains don't interpret the minute conversational cues that we rely on. So it's great when you go on the internet because then everybody is talking in a way that they can understand. Like he says, there is something exciting and reassuring for individuals on the autism spectrum about communicating with other people over the internet. For one thing, talking in chat rooms or by email does not require you to know how to initiate a conversation or when to smile or the numerous intricacies of body language, as in other social situations. There is no eye contact, and it is possible to understand the other person's every word because everything is written down. The use of emoticons, such as smiley face or sad face in chat room conversations, also makes it easier to know how the other person is feeling, because he or she tells you in a simple visual method. I kind of laughed when I read that, though, because when I read that, all I could picture was P. Diddy and Get Him to the Creek.
Bill Maher, red, white, and spew.
Where the fuck are you? I'm gonna kill you. Smiley face.
Fuck him.
As far as trying to find work when he comes back from Lithuania, he goes on a side note thing about how maybe we need to think about how we interview people with autism when applying for a job. Not dismissing them, but tweaking the way that we interview them for a job. Like he said, questions in an interview can also be hard to follow and answer adequately. Several of the questions I was asked in my interview related to hypothetical situations, which I found difficult to imagine and could only reply briefly to. It would be a lot better if questions instead focused on actual past experience to demonstrate what the person already knows. People on the autism spectrum can bring much of benefit to a job in a company or organization. Reliability, honesty, a high level of accuracy, considerable attention to detail, and a good knowledge of various facts and figures. Firms who employ individuals with autism or Asperger's help to raise awareness of diversity among their staff, while managers with autistic employees often find that they learn to communicate with their whole team more effectively. I thought was a very good point. But in the end, Daniel uses his ability to learn languages really quickly and ends up developing his own language website where it works kind of like Rosetta Stone, but it's done through this website of his, which if you're interested, I will link down below. It's called Optimum. Optimum. I think that's how you say it. I have a hard time with M's and N's next to each other. Also, he tells a story about how when he was trying to raise money or awareness for autism, he took on the project of trying to beat the world record for most digits in pi recited at one time. And I think he said he did over 22,000 digits in pi. Like, yeah. I can do maybe like the first 5. In that same time frame, he meets Kim Peek, who is the guy that inspired the movie Rain Man. Dustin Hoffman actually met Kim Peek and decided he wanted to do a film around that guy. Resulting film was Rain Man. There's a documentary called Brain Man where they actually filmed the meeting between Daniel Tammet and Kim Peek, and I will link that down below as well. Just be sure you check out the down bar on this one because I'm going to put a whole bunch of stuff down here that I came across in my reading. There was a conversation that Daniel Tammet had with Kim Peek's father where his father talks about how when Kim was a child, the doctors told him that it would be best to institutionalize Kim and just forget about him, basically. Or the doctor said, if you'd rather, I can offer to lobotomize him. And thankfully, Kim's father was like, are you insane? And they ended up just, raising him normally. And Kim found a love of libraries, which is something he shared with Daniel. And I could relate to what they were saying about how they go into libraries because it's a sense of peace and calm. There's just sort of something that centers them when they're in them. And I could definitely relate to that because I'm the same way anytime I enter bookstores or libraries, anything like that. I get very agitated. I have since I was a child. I get very agitated with loud noises. Could be one reason I don't have children is I cannot stand the sound of a squealing child. I can't. My ears are too hypersensitive to high-pitched sound. And most of the time when I go out in the world is so loud. Like everybody, I'm constantly saying, why doesn't this person have a better inside voice? It's even hard for me. There are some really uber popular booktubers and YouTubers that everybody seems to be subscribed to, and I cannot subscribe to them because they talk too loud and at too high pitch a sound that I can't explain it. I've been that way since I was a kid, that the majority of the world just sounds too loud to me. And so I've always found a lot of peace and calm in libraries and bookstores because everybody is insisting on being quiet in those places. And so so I could definitely relate to that because then it's just everybody is in their own minds and not all up in your space. So I could appreciate that. It was also this book that was pointing out characteristics of autism and Asperger's that Daniel talks about in this book were some of the things that I had noticed in the character of Daniel in Pleasure of My Company that made me think that Steve Martin might have pulled from autism or Asperger's to help create that character. It's just a really interesting read overall. I will say that, and I think he mentions it himself while he's writing this, mentions that one of the traits of autism and Asperger's that he's aware of and he's trying to work on is a sort of lack of empathy for people, or like I was saying, the brain works very literally. So it's not that they don't care or they're insensitive, it's just their brain just works differently. And so when you're reading this, you may notice that it's a little bit detached tone to his writing that he seems aware of when he's writing, but he's like, it's the way my brain is, what do you want me to do about it? But he explains that he is always working on trying to improve that quality so that people don't misinterpret that as him not caring about anybody. He says the people that are close to him in his life, he cares very deeply about them, but he just expresses it in a different way. And so keep that in mind when you're reading this, that you may get into it and think, gosh, this has a very sort of almost clinical, detached tone, but that's just, he explains that just has to do with the Asperger's. The last one I read before doing this video was Look Me in the Eye by John Elder Robison. If you're a fan of Augusten Burroughs, and Augusten Burroughs is one of my favorite nonfiction writers, if you're a fan of his, this is Augusten's brother. Augusten Burroughs is not Augusten Burroughs' real name. His real name is Chris Robison. Augusten Burroughs is his pen name. Or no, I think it's actually his real name now, but it's not the name he was born with. So this is the memoir of Augusten Burroughs' brother, John, who has Asperger's. This one is very much more casual in tone, much more conversational than Born on a Blue Day, though between the two of them they have very similar experiences as far as being very interested in mathematics and machinery and that kind of thing. John even mentions Born on a Blue Day in this book, and mentions that people often note the difference in tones between his book and Born on a Blue Day, and he said he even noticed it when he read Born on a Blue Day. He wasn't officially diagnosed with Asperger's until he was 40, and he points out that he grew up in a time before we started calling it Asperger's, though he said there were a number of classic traits that we associate with that now, with Asperger's now, that he could recognize in his childhood, but all of the characteristic traits that doctors look for in order to diagnose Asperger's, all those things that we've sort of put together to determine if it's Asperger's or not. He said that wasn't really put together until 1981, and he was growing up in the 70s. So yeah, he didn't find out till much later in adulthood that it was actually Asperger's, even though he'd been living with it his entire life. It was pretty much just he reached 40 and they put a name to it. This is him going back, talking about some of the experiences that he had to work through with this condition that he didn't have a name for the majority of his life. Again, if you're familiar with Augusten's books, you know that a number of his books have to do with what happened in his childhood. Most famously, Running with Scissors, when he talks about his father's alcoholism and his mother's slow decline into severe mental illness. With John's book, you get John's side of it. I liked the fact that in here we got to see John's side of it as well, even though it was heartbreaking to read some of the things that John had to go through. And his struggles with his father being alcoholic and abusive, and his mother having her struggles with mental illness, and both parents being sort of limited in their affection. So he finds a lot of peace in machinery, technology, and mathematics and that kind of thing. That develops into him growing up and getting he gets a job building special stunt guitars, special effects guitars for the band Kiss. Goes on tour with them. When he's not on tour with them, he's pretty much out of a job. His job is pretty much just to get the guitars for them when they're on tour. And so when he comes back home, he has to figure out another line of work. He ends up installing sound and lighting equipment for nightclubs. Somebody from Milton Bradley hears about him and asks him to come on to design sound chips for the electronic games they want to start building. And he's with them for a while, ends up getting into a management position all by the age of 23. He's in a management position at Milton Bradley. And he gets to a point where he's working for Milton Bradley where he said it's a good job, but it's not really holding my interest. It's not my lifelong dream to be doing this kind of work. He ends up leaving the corporate world and starting up his own company repairing and servicing luxury European cars. And in his book, he also talks about the struggles he had with not being able to pick up on subtle facial expressions or sarcasm or that kind of thing. He talks a lot about sarcasm being lost on him, and I kept picturing Sheldon from Big Bang Theory, which again, I feel like the writers of that show, I've watched a lot of Big Bang Theory. I don't remember them actually coming out and saying Sheldon had Asperger's, but when you watch that show, it's hard to watch him and not think that the writers were somehow inspired by those traits to write that in. I wasn't quite as riveted with this one as I was Born on a Blue Day. There was still a good look into high-functioning Asperger people, especially people that are well into their adulthood, how they cope with society. One of my favorite parts of this was when he talks about his son being born. One of the things that when you're reading this, you might find a little bit odd is he talks about his relationships with people in sort of animalistic terms. I'll read something in a minute that will explain that a little bit better. But he refers to people a lot as like being wild or being a bear or a wolf cub or something. He refers to people by their, instead of hands, he uses paws, that kind of thing. His first wife, he had named her Little Bear. And he explains that when he has trouble with people's names, saying people's names, but he knows if he doesn't know you that well, he knows that's going to throw you off a little bit. So he tends to keep it to people he is close with. He'll give them nicknames and refer to them that way instead of using their real names. So his first wife he called Little Bear. And so when they had their son together, he nicknamed his son Cubby. And there's a part in here where he talks about the birth of his son. It's just the way he looks at things just cracked me up. I loved it. He said, "I never did figure out why they insisted on rolling Little Bear out the door in a wheelchair." This is the day, I think few days after his son was born, maybe. "After all, she came in on her own 2 feet, walking and talking. She wasn't sick, and she was 20 pounds lighter. Their insistence on rolling her out made me think of an auto repair shop where the cars drive in on their own power and go home and on wreckers a few days later, sort of backwards." Just the way he talks about his son was really heartwarming in this book, and especially when you read about his own father, the fact that he could turn that around and be a very dedicated dad to his son, which, autism or not, I'm always floored by dedicated dads that embrace it and are all for being kind-hearted to their children, because from my own experiences and lack of having that or having enough of it, I can appreciate what having a really dedicated, kind-hearted, engaged dad can be, what a gift that can be. So yeah, I would definitely recommend picking this one up. There's a lot of good aspects he offers in this that you might not get out of Born on a Blue Day. I mean, I would recommend checking them all out at some point if this is a topic that interests you. You're going to take something away from all of these books. When Martha first met me, I was anxious and jumpy. I was always tapping my foot, rocking, or exhibiting some other behavioral aberration. Of course, now we know that's just normal Asperger behavior, but back then the other people thought it was weird, and so of course I did too. One day, for some reason, she decided to try petting my arm, and I immediately stopped rocking and fidgeting. The result was so dramatic she never stopped. It didn't take long for me to realize the calming effect too. I liked being petted and scratched. Psychologists have done studies on people petting animals. They've proven it has a calming effect on the people, lowering their heart rate and blood pressure. I wonder why they haven't done studies of people petting people. Normal people haven't caught on to the benefits. We sleep in piles. When I was little, I used to like to hide in small spaces. I don't do that much anymore, but I can still become unsettled lying down by myself on a bed. If I lie down by myself, I will pile pillows on top of me, but the best situation by far is to have my mate lie down too and pile herself up against me. Which, when I was reading this, it also reminded me of Animals in Translation when Temple Grandin talks about inventing her hugging machine because she found it very calming to be gently squeezed, and she said it's hard to get a person to do it correctly though that isn't painful to them. So that kind of reminded me of that. Every night when we go to bed, she puts an arm or a leg on me and lies up against me until I fall asleep. If she doesn't, I complain. Come on, I say, put a paw on your mate. Can you pet me? Can you scratch my fur? I am always calmer and more relaxed in a pile, being petted. Nowadays, for the first time, I fall asleep quickly and I seldom have bad dreams. If I wake up, she puts a paw on me and I go back to sleep. I put a paw on her too. Sometimes I wake up in the night and find we have rolled apart. We'll be sleeping on our sides, facing in opposite directions. I'll slide over until our backs are touching, and I'll slide my bent legs back towards her. She'll wake up enough to reach her own foot over, and our feet will touch, and I'll fall back asleep, content and warm. I feel safe sleeping in a pile. I'm not sure why that would be, since I am the bigger and stronger one, but it's true. Ever since I was a child, I knew that lying under a pile of pillows was a lot better than just lying on top of the bed. Sleeping in a pile is a lot better than that, though. It's the best of all. I like my married life a lot. I thought that was really sweet. So yeah, I would definitely check all these out. Check out Temple Grandin's book. She has a few of them out. I think this is the only one of hers I've read, but I do want to check out her other ones. And coincidentally, Temple Grandin was also blurbed and mentioned in both Born on a Blue Day and Look Me in the Eye. They're all connected. And this one I forgot to mention. At the end of it, he also talks about in his postscript that this book is also now being used in schools to teach not only autistic children, but also teach it as general curriculum to teach empathy to non-autistic children, which I thought was really cool. But he does mention that, I guess the paperback version is the cleaned up version. I guess he mentions that in the first draft of the book that got published, he swears a lot more, and teachers were coming to him saying, I really like your story, I would like to teach it in my class, but I don't think I can use that language. So he said that the hardcover version, if you want the unedited, cursed up version, it's the hardcover. The paperback is the cleaned up version that he went back and edited to be able to use in schools. Just FYI. There are some links he mentions in his book that I will link down below that you can check out if you're interested in this topic. But I think I'll close this with what he closed his memoir with. He said, "One last thing. I may look and act pretty strange at times, but deep down I just want to be loved and understood for who and what I am. I want to be accepted as part of society, not an outcast or an outsider. I don't want to be a genius or a freak or something on display. I wish for empathy and compassion from those around me, and I appreciate sincerity, clarity, and logicality in other people. I believe most people, autistic or not, share this wish. And now, with my newfound insight, I'm on the way to achieving that goal. I hope you'll keep those thoughts in mind the next time you meet someone who looks or acts a little strange." So that's it. I think I'm going to leave it there, guys. Thanks for watching. Hope this was informative, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye, guys.